don't necessarily want to recreate what you've got already. It could be something very different that we probably don't even know what that might be yet.
Hello and welcome to Thrivalism, Interactions podcast on all things workplace and workplace culture. Today I'm joined by Dan Pritchard, head honcho of Astley Media and connector-in-chief of the Tech Southwest Network. And we're going to have a quick ramble through the Metaverse together. So it's probably best to start with the basics. Dan, have I done you justice in that intro? Is that how you would introduce yourself, or have I got it all wrong?
I think that's how I'd introduce myself, both in the universe and in the Metaverse. Yeah, that's right.
Perfect. Just applies across both. So let's just dive into the Metaverse. What is it?
What is it? Yeah, well, I think it's that's a great question, and it's evolving all the time, and we're not there yet. But if you think about the platforms we use, the worlds we inhabit, and particularly digital natives, the way it's second nature. Minecraft. Everyone will know it and either have used it or because that is a world. Yeah, Fortnite. That is a game, but it's also a world. And then you have things like Roblox, which are whole platforms where people go in there and build games, build spaces for people to hang out. So if you imagine layer upon layer of different gaming companies, that's where it all started, and others building these platforms, which then become, it's a space you step into. So Facebook, Twitter is 2D, you're there, it's text, it's video, it's image, but you're staring through a screen. You turn into that 3D space and suddenly you're in something which potentially is part of the Metaverse. And of course, we're a long way away from it all being joined up, which is what Facebook want, hence the change to Meta, and they want us all to flock there. But, already they're building bridges between these different worlds. So I suppose the Metaverse is that state you get to when they're all kind of connected so that you can be in these different platforms, and it's seamless and it's 3D and it's all there as one big mass. I suppose that's a way of me trying to get my head around it.
Sounds sort of beautiful and awful at the same time. In terms of a time frame, because obviously, it's nascent at the moment and people are still really struggling to create parts of it. How far away do you think that joined up ecosystem of platforms is?
I think it's years and years. I think, it's going to evolve over if you think about the internet, the early versions of the internet were very different to what came later. So this is part of Web 3.0. We're talking 5 to 10 years, probably more like the 10 before. It feels like this is happening for real. But that doesn't mean there's not going to be versions and elements of it. The big thing is, I think one of the big questions is this a move to centralization? Come and join us. Let's all be over here. Or is it decentralization because actually, no, people don't want that and we want to create our own world? Do the gamers want to hang out alongside the work conference people, alongside the brands, all in one kind of multifaceted, multi-layered metaverse? And I think there's big questions about that because as marketeers, we know audiences want different things. We can't all chuck them into one space, right?
Yeah, and continuing that thought, the internet tends to move towards fragmentation by its own nature, doesn't it? You find people who share your same interests and opinions, and you find platforms like Facebook that reward engaging with those and reward especially when they get a bit toxic and set all your dopamine triggers off.
Absolutely.
So do you see the eventual nature of it heading towards more fragmentation, or do you see it being a unifying platform that can bring the internet back together?
I don't know. I think it's the real big question. And, why are young people flocking to TikTok and ignoring Facebook? Because it meets their needs. It's where their friends are. It's where their parents are not. It's where they can do their stuff. So in a metaverse, if you've got the worlds of entertainment, sport, leisure, learning, commerce, gaming, how is that going to manifest itself in a sort of joined up way? That is absolutely huge. And I don't think any of us know the answer yet. But what we do know is that, Google, Microsoft, Facebook are going to spend millions and billions trying to kind of create their version of it, or be the platform, or be part of the part of the metaverse kind of foundation. And they have big budget. They have lots of reasons to hook people in terms of the consumers, but also brands. So that I'm sure it's going to swell and grow, and that whole centralizing piece is going to happen. But at the same time, you're going to have forces pushing against that. And that's the bit that's going to play out, and it's going to be really fascinating for brands.
I think in terms of previous things to look at that share the same sort of shape and feel as the metaverse, AR and VR and things like that have been bubbling away for ages as the next big thing, immersive media, and they've never really taken off because they probably don't particularly scratch a consumer urge or question. They don't really answer a problem that people tend to face. And when I think about the metaverse, I think, what problem is it solving? And I don't really have an answer to that. It feels like it's being foisted on us to some extent by those companies you talk about who've got a vested interest in turning a profit out of it over the long term. So what consumer problem or what day-to-day problem do you think it will be good for?
Well, I think that problem is solving, it's a really interesting point, and because it is so diverse, it's so big. The metaverse is potentially everything and anything, isn't it? And it doesn't have to be constrained by the boundaries of how we exist in real life, I suppose, and in the 2D way where we do a lot of things. And one of the problems is a lot of the barriers. You mentioned AR, VR. The kind of, there are lots of reasons not to get, because it's clunky at the moment, and you have to put in glasses or headsets and all these kind of things. It hasn't worked. And I think in terms of the problems it's going to solve is going to be a range of different things potentially. And you think the digital kind of shove we've had the last couple of years because of COVID, we've all embraced digital communications in whole new ways. You fast forward that to how people want to hang out and interact and live their lives, learning. I think it's easy to think about the brands and the marketing aspect, but also the metaverse for learning. If you're a history teacher walking down the streets of Rome with 20 kids, for real in the metaverse, that is an interesting concept, and there'll be companies thinking about that. There'll be entrepreneurs thinking about that, and there'll be people with passions thinking about that kind of stuff, and you take that across every sphere, in terms of entertainment, going to the Live Aid gig in 1985 and doing it for real in the metaverse, standing on stage and being in the band for real in the metaverse. That is interesting concepts, and that is all doable, and there becomes monetary value to some of these things in terms of the commercial side. So I don't know about the problems it's solving, but you look at the move, the digital move we've gone, through every decade, and it's about platforms and interaction and creativity, which is the exciting bit, although it's very scary as well, for people like me who've been around a long time.
That element about that element about the teaching is really interesting because that's not an aspect of it I've considered. But when I think back to my geography lessons at school, where essentially watching a VHS video on some Welsh coal mine 12 times in a row, to be able to have those immersive experiences instead will be really compelling. I guess I've thought about much more in terms of entertainment and gaming and things like that. So there's obviously a lot more to it than I've sort of chipped away at, I think.
I think so, because I think every vertical needs to think about it, doesn't it? In terms of, the gaming and entertainment will lead the way for sure. But education, training... And
pornography, let's not forget pornography.
Well, absolutely, and this is one of the dangers. And already, Facebook and others are facing challenge about some of the sort of these virtual worlds they've got, and allegations of stalking, grooming, all these kind of things. So it's going to be a Wild West part of this as well, which is really...
Well, even in Roblox that you mentioned earlier, there's a lot of issues in Roblox, aren't there, with sort of non-safe material being put into that little universe and stuff.
Yeah. And of course, brands, the world we work in, those brands are going to have to really think about their reputation, about, when is the time to dive into this, because they won't want to be associated with anything like that, of course.
There's a couple of points in what you just said that I'd like to pick up on. I'll go back to one of the first ones, which is about entertainment being driven through the pandemic by people needing those online experiences in lieu of real life ones. Now the pandemic is hopefully ceasing up a bit. Do you think that people will be... Part of me feels like the metaverse almost missed its chief wave that it could have ridden during the pandemic when people were hungry for experiences like that. And now as real face-to-face interaction is creeping back into life and real gigs and real concerts, maybe there'll be a swing the other way, away from digital, back into shared experiences in the real world.
Yeah, and I think for now there will be that desire to kind of connect person to person for sure, but that doesn't mean the metaverse isn't going to happen, and it's going to happen in some way or other. It's just what kind of format it's going to take, because these Roblox was founded like 2004 or something, which isn't something ridiculous, and it's like 50 million users every day now, and that's just one little world really where people are doing their thing. And that is, Facebook and TikTok and Instagram, that's what they are. We're world builders. Humans are world builders, and we will keep doing that, and we will keep using the technology to push it and push it and push it. I think that's the inevitable bit. How it turns out, that's the unknown bit. And the pandemic, what we have done is got over some hurdles around how we communicate and how we engage digitally. That's for sure, and so that there's no going back from that, and that plays in, I suppose, in the longer term.
And the second point from what you said was about, we sort of touched on it briefly, but policing. When you've got interconnected platforms who polices it? Whose responsibility is it to make sure the metaverse is a safe place for people? Like, I obviously that answer is a long way off from being actually known. But what are your thoughts on how that might work?
Yeah, absolutely. And the big tech platforms, if they want to be part of this and be part of we are providing the metaverse for you, they have to be part of that. Regulators, and it's across countries, and we already know regulation lags behind the reality of where tech is. So we do not want to see that again. It's high risk for it's not right for the consumers, for people using it, and it's not good for brands. And brands won't want to be part of that space if it becomes this a place where that can happen. So. Yeah, I mean, there's no easy solution to that, is it? But it will be on the minds of, and there'll be teams trying to sort of understand that. But it'll be a forever game. It'll be a forever game because there'll be people who wanted to use these platforms for their own devices, and we can't stop people wanting to do that, and then verges onto the criminal gangs and crypto and all the other things that's going to be in the mix around this. So it's going to be another step on, isn't it, in terms of regulation and charters and the tangible things. Yeah. But it's it doesn't mean it's going to stop it happening, but it means we've got to learn the lessons from the past and some of these platforms and problems that we've had.
We're obviously really interested in the impact on culture in the workplace and how Metaverse might be used for businesses and stuff like that. We've seen a few hybrid. Gymshark did a hybrid meeting in the Metaverse, which seems to gather a lot of traction on social. I don't know if you saw the interview with Nick Clegg in the Metaverse where he was trying to drink a coffee, but because the Oculus can't scan the coffee cup, that was invisible. So he was apologising for his weird movement. All a bit chaotic, but really worth a look. We'll pop a link in the show notes. But what do you see the impact on the Metaverse being in how we work and the ways we work and communicate in the workspace? Yeah,
and I think that working and that collaborating piece is an area where it's going to charge ahead. Whether it's all going to sit in a space quite soon where gaming is going on and other things, I'm not so sure. But we are on that path. I've been to kind of virtual conferences now where I've walked around and virtually as an avatar and stepped into conversations and seen the branding and seen the interaction. And it's early days. It's a bit clunky, but it's happening. We've got over that digital barrier around how we communicate. So I think that the work part of it is gonna forge ahead for sure. If you Tech Southwest, we run lots of events on Hopin. That is, we're trying to make it as immersive as possible, but it's still essentially a 2D experience. So that recently, like the Tech Talent Summit that you were involved with, and interaction we're involved with, you imagine that in a 3D world, walking around from session to session, going up to panelists afterwards, having a conversation, connecting, forming a little informal breakout. You can do it 2D and you can do it 3D. 3D will only really take off when it's easier and better. That's the ultimate test, isn't it? But we want to do these things. So it sort of sounds good, but then it also sounds awful at the same time. Like doing that in a 3D world, I'm not sure if anyone really wants that. But that's what people said about the internet. That's what people said about games consoles. That's what people said about phones in your pocket bugging you all the time. And how many hours do you spend a day on your phone? Each of these new kind of steps forward with all the good and all the bad that brings, they still have happened. And part of me thinks, oh my God, I just want to be outside,
It's like a Henry Ford quote, isn't it? When he's talking about selling cars. And he's like, if I asked people what they wanted, they'd have asked for a faster horse. And somebody has to come along and give them something that's entirely new before people realise that they want it. So maybe I'm just looking at faster horses. I don't know.
And if you've got, I've got kids. So I've got a 17-year-old who's doing game development, course, and he grew up with Minecraft. And he also grew up with Lego at the same time. So he's doing both. He's immersed in these virtual worlds. But it also aligned with what he did outside those virtual worlds. And that's one of the big things, isn't it? That balance between the two, because, addiction is going to be part of it. All these kind of things are going to be in the mix and heightened concerns. But it's also going to be an amazing place to be creative and collaborate and do really interesting things, and brands that embrace that and think about that and aren't constrained by the platforms we've had before and thinking how, you don't necessarily want to recreate what you've got already. It could be something very different that we probably don't even know what that might be yet.
And I think about it, obviously, I think about it in terms of office design and what that might look like in the metaverse. And suddenly you've got spaces that could be a level of a computer game where you have your team, or, the opportunities for creativity in that space are huge, aren't they? And they don't have to be defined by how we've done things before. And I think the other thing that I'm interested in is, you mentioned your avatar in the 3D space earlier, But the idea of representation and that taking another step in how people can represent themselves to feel more aligned with their virtual representation, how they feel inside. So if you're non-binary, or you can build an avatar that reflects exactly how you feel about yourself rather than how you look. I think that's a really interesting space. But then also, if that's in a workplace scenario, will you have to have rules on what your avatar can look like and dress like? You're going to have a metaverse dress code. All these things rush down the pipe quite quickly, don't they, in terms of the details?
Yeah, and often we plunge in, and then you think, oh, actually, that's human sort of instinct sometimes. But yeah, you're right. And you think about it as workplace culture. There's your organization. There's the organizations you want to work with. Do you want to create a world where your clients can be? Do you want to create a world with, 1,000 other companies that you'd really get on with? It sort of is an individual level. There's an organizational level. There's a brand level. There's interests level. And we're in a world of bricks and mortar and location and nipping out to coffee bars and all those kind of things. Does it have to be the same in the metaverse, or is it radically different in terms of how we connect and how we appear and how we kind of move around it and interact with it? That is all open, isn't it, and up for debate. And maybe we need comfort and for early versions. Sorry.
Yeah, and I think what's going to be really interesting about that is it won't be old farts like me and you creating it. It'll be people like your son with a background in programming and Minecraft and building, and the things they create there with that entirely new mindset might be radically different from anything we know, and it might be really exciting. But I'll probably be too old to actually understand it. But
we'll be in our metaverse retirement home with an ocean lapping
forever
at our feet, and forever and ever. And someone will forget to turn us off even when we've long gone. It's like, who are those people still sitting there with their virtual drinks, looking out the virtual sunset?
Oh no, I'll have a real drink in a virtual sunset. That'll be fine. Although the Oculus wouldn't pick it up, would it? Well, I obviously get the sense you're quite optimistic about what it holds in the long term. What are you most optimistic about, and what are you most wary about in the sort of bigger picture?
I think most optimistic about, if you look at some of the platforms that have worked in the past, they're the ones that have we've created technology which is easy to access, and then we've let the creativity run wild. Yes, and then regulation and other things. Look at YouTube. YouTube is a very standard platform, really. But out of that, careers have been made. Incredible careers that we could not have predicted 10, 15 years ago about people commentating, watching games and then commentating on it, and have built careers out of that. Playing music and becoming DJs at real gigs, if you see what I mean. So, the platforms that allow the creativity, the human urge to be creative, rather than defining it too much and being too narrow, are the ones that are going to win. And that's really exciting for me, who loves creativity in work and sort of leisure and play and all the other things. That's the really exciting bit. So that's the bit I'm optimistic about in terms of the platforms or the versions of the metaverse where you can be, you look at what goes on in Minecraft and some of the other platforms. It's fantastic. It's amazing. And the original people who pulled that together never could have predicted some of the ways it gets used. That's the exciting bit for me. And of course, from that comes brand opportunities, etc. The scary bit is, is it going to be too centralized and too controlled and too rigid? And therefore, it stifles all that and stifles the real opportunity and the dangers and risks around, parental control, all those kind of things as well, criminality and all those things which are going to go on in the metaverse just as they go on in real life, and how we can manage that. I've no doubt that that's the direction we're having. We've already created these virtual worlds. We have done for decades, really, and it's just how it all comes together. And that sort of push and pull between centralization and control, the big tech giants, versus freedom and the things that spring up. Who knew TikTok was going to be the video platform now that all the other platforms are learning from? That was not on our radar 4 years ago. No way. So, yeah. A mix of optimism and pessimism, but mostly optimistic, Toby.
That sounds fairly balanced. You're very obviously connected into the Southwest Technology Network. Are there any people doing interesting work in this space? Anyone who's starting to dabble in the metaverse or put things together that you've come across?
Not really, but what we have got is the companies, I suppose, that are doing things, leading in some of these different specialisms. So we've got companies like Codices down at, that sprung out of Founders Launchpad. It's sort of all over Twitch and gaming and creating these technologies, and they will be thinking about the next iteration and when do these things start to play out as their clients increase their interest in these areas. There's companies doing all sorts of things in AI that will be like intelligent AI in Exeter, for example, that will be starting to they're super brainy people starting to think about this version of it, because there's companies that create these amazing kind of interactive dashboards, are trying to take loads and loads of, reams of information and turn it into something that's manageable and understandable by human beings. There's 3D and metaverse versions of that, but I think it's too early in a way. And there's probably people will then say, no, we're doing this, we're doing that. But and there's people sort of playing. But I think it's too early to see how that is going to play out in a regional level. To be honest, because it's so
people just playing in the component parts of it. Yeah,
which I think is great. And that's what we need, that experiment and play.
So I began this conversation quite cynical and pessimistic about it. I feel somewhat more optimistic now. I'm quite looking forward to seeing where it is in 10 years, I guess, and certainly exploring some of the opportunities in it. I guess the thing I wanted to wrap up on, really, you're way more versed in the subject than I am. What is a question that I should have asked, or what is a question that we should be discussing that I've just forgotten to include?
The question you haven't asked. Well, I think in terms of for brands and marketing, it's what does it mean for brands? And we don't know yet. And there'll be this period where brands are sort of the big brands we need to be in there. You always see McDonald's and others sort of registering kind of trademarks and rights to be in the metaverse and doing our thing, selling our thing. So I think the big question is, is this for everyone, or is this just for the big players? And the answer to that is, there's a question mark, and a caveat, of course, is you'd be foolish not to explore it. But, timing is everything, right? And early adopters, there's gains and risks around that. So it's not for everyone at this stage. But if that's how we as consumers, as people, want to interact and engage and be part of our lives, just as social platforms are now, then the rush will happen, won't it? And do you want to be at the forefront of that, or at the back, the laggard, trying to catch up with your competitors? So, it's going to be different for different sectors. Entertainment, gaming, right at the forefront of that. But I think every sector, there's a potential that's going to be in that world.
Amazing. Cool. That's loads to think about. Thanks, Dan. So I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you for coming on, spending time. It's been really interesting. We've been recording this in the middle of the storm, but being fairly uninterrupted by big bricks coming through our windows and stuff like that. So that's
the thing for me was when the box of the recording podcast kits turned up, and I thought, wow, the metaverse has arrived in a black box, just like IT Crowd. They had the internet, and then I had the metaverse that arrived, complete with a code to break into it, which I couldn't find for about 20 minutes. I thought the metaverse is in there somewhere, and quite
life imitating art, imitating life. Beautiful.
Absolutely.
Dan, thank you very much for coming on.
Cheers,
speak to you soon.
Brilliant.
Cheers, bye.
All the best.
I hope you enjoyed that. And if you did, please give us a good rating on your platform of choice and be sure to subscribe to future episodes. And while you're doing that, why not follow Interaction on all the usual socials? Thanks, and see you on the next episode.